When it comes to portrait photography, a lot of photographers enjoy focal lengths like the 85mm, the 100mm, or even the 135. Those slightly longer focal lengths tend to work quite well in both blurring out the background and also separating the subject from the background as well. So it's a great choice for many photographers. However, I find those kinds of lenses just a little bit too long for my style of photography, and personally I prefer something wider. 50mm is a little bit too wide for me, 85mm is just a little bit too long, so I like something in between. And for a long time I've been shooting with the Sony Zeiss 55mm f1.8. I love this little lens. It's tiny, it's got great image quality, and I like the slightly longer focal length compared to 50mm. Recently, however, Sigma released, I say recently, kind of recently, Sigma released the 65mm f2. This lens is, for me, on my style of shooting, the perfect focal length for portrait photography. It sits comfortably between 85mm and 50mm, and I've been really enjoying shooting with this lens. And I wanted to compare the two to see which one is the best portrait lens for me or my style of photography. So we're in Leeds at the moment. We're going to take a bunch of pictures. I've got Sonia who's helping me model, or who's modeling in this video. She's not helping me model, she's modeling in the video, and we're going to take a bunch of pictures to see which one is the better lens. So the first thing I noticed in terms of performance was that the 65mm lens was just a lot snappier when it came to the autofocus. Also, the 65mm is just a better built lens. It's all metal in terms of design, it has a metal lens hood, it even has a proper aperture ring on the barrel and a autofocus and manual focus switch. When it comes to image quality, the 65mm lens is noticeably sharper in comparison to the 55mm when shot wide open. It picks up more detail, there's more clarity, and it has better contrast compared to the 55mm. Even when you stop the aperture down to f2 to match the aperture of the 65mm lens, the 65 is still sharper in comparison to the 55, picking up more detail and has better clarity. The other thing I noticed is that the 65mm lens has better color rendition, or more accurate color rendition. Even when shot at the same camera with the same white balance, the 65 does a better job at picking out the colors in a more realistic and neutral manner. The 55mm tends to have a slight magenta cast to it. Another important thing that needs to be mentioned is that the 55mm has more chromatic aberrations compared to the 65. With the 65, it's almost non-existent even when you're shooting wide open. However, with the 55, there's lots of purple and green fringing across the image. And once again, colors from the 65 are just quite a bit nicer in comparison to the 55mm lens. And again, same camera, same white balance with the same lighting scenario. Soumya and I also took some pictures in a more controlled scenario where we were shooting with lighting and a backdrop, and the results were pretty much the same. The 65mm outperformed the 55 in virtually every area. However, once we stopped the lens down to around f4, that's when the 55mm really caught up and the differences were less apparent between both lenses. So here we have the images opened up in Lightroom, and honestly, from this distance, both results look great. I mean, I use the 55mm for a lot of work, so I like the results from the 55mm lens. However, as you start zooming in, that's when you start to see the real differences between both lenses and the performance. And you can see quite clearly how the 65mm picks up a lot more detail in comparison to the 55. The 55 is quite a bit softer when you're shooting wide open. Having said that, for portraits, some people may prefer the softer look because the super sharp lenses aren't always the most flattering lenses when it comes to portrait photography. And this is one of the reasons why people use mist filters, because they want to kind of just soften the edges a little bit, not make it look too harsh. But I don't think the 65mm looks harsh. I just think it looks really sharp and clear. It's got that clarity. So between the two, I'm leaning towards the 65. I like the look of the 65mm, both in terms of like overall look and also in terms of detail and clarity. Also, once again, the chromatic aberrations on both lenses, the 55 is pretty bad when it comes to chromatic aberrations. I mean, it's not the worst performing lens, but it does have noticeable chromatic aberrations compared to the 65. The 65 is very clean when it comes to those kinds of issues. So that personally is, for me, the biggest deciding factor, because if you look at this section over here, you can see how the chromatic aberrations, they're affecting the dress and the color and the tone, and I really do not like that. It's quite tough to get rid of in an effective manner. The chromatic aberrations, for me personally, are a bigger problem with the 55mm than having a slightly softer lens, because I use mist filters as well sometimes. So for me, the lack of detail is not an issue. That I do not have a big problem with. Biggest problem for me is the chromatic aberrations. However, when you stop down to f4, both lenses sharpen up really, really well, and then the differences between both lenses kind of disappears. So around f4, the 55 is incredibly sharp. I mean, yes, the 65 is slightly sharper, but not by much. I mean, the difference is negligible at this point. But once again, it's the chromatic aberrations. And yes, the 55 does get a heck of a lot better than it is when you're shooting wide open. So over here in the with the wide open image, the chromatic aberrations were really bad, but it's still not quite as good as the 65. The 65 is just considerably better at controlling those aberrations in the image. And again, like I said, it does clean up really well, but it still has that slight tinge to it, which I just personally do not like. And finally, I wanted to demonstrate the focal length difference or field of view difference between a 50, a 65 and an 85mm lens, just so that you've got a clear understanding of where these focal lengths sit. And the first image that we're looking at, this was shot with the Sigma 50mm f1.8 art on the A7R3, and this is kind of like the field of view that you're going to get. Obviously, all of these images were shot from the same distance to the subject, and this is a 50mm, this is a 65mm, and this is an 85mm. So there's a big jump between each one. So if we go from 85 to 50, you can see there's a big jump between the look of the image and the field of view. The 85 is quite a bit cropped in comparison to the 50mm. However, that 65mm just sits comfortably in between both of them. It's not quite as wide as a 50, but it's just not as cropped in as an 85, and for that reason I just like that little mid ground between both of these lenses. So once again, 50mm, 65, 85, and there's a big jump between 65 and 85, but between 50 and 65, not a huge jump. I just like that additional focal length. It just works for my style of photography. So there you have it. That's how the Sigma 65mm f2 compares against the Sony Zeiss 55mm f1.8, and it's a clear win for the Sigma. It's better in almost every category. It beats the Sony in virtually every area: sharpness, clarity, contrast, colors, and especially chromatic aberrations. It's just a better lens. It's built better. It has metal construction, metal lens hood. It's got better lens design with the aperture ring and the autofocus switch. It's just a better lens overall and in virtually every category, not to mention the fact that it is a much less expensive lens as well. So it's a better lens and it costs about 35% less. On the B&H website, the Sony Zeiss is about $1,000, whereas the Sigma is only about $650. So you are saving quite a lot more money with the Sigma and getting a better lens. The only area where the Sony Zeiss can arguably beat the Sigma is the fact that it's a smaller lens, it's a lighter lens, and it has a smaller filter thread size, so filters may potentially be less expensive on the Sony Zeiss, but then again, you're paying more for the lens in the first place, so that doesn't really work out. I'm really impressed with the Sigma 65 f2. It's definitely my favorite lens at the moment. I love this lens, and I'm quite pleased with what Sigma is doing, because before they were making these huge, ridiculous lenses, which I bought some of them, but honestly, I rarely, hardly ever shot with them because they were just big, large, bulky bits of glass that I just hated carrying around. And these new lenses, these small, compact lenses for the mirrorless cameras, I love them. I absolutely adore them. I love shooting with them. The lenses are small, they fit in your pocket. I take them in a little bag. It's just amazing. I love them, and I'm very pleased with what Sigma is doing with the new mirrorless lenses that they're producing. I did do a slight comparison for the autofocus, but I didn't want to put it into the video, and the reason I didn't want to put it into this video is because I've got a slightly older camera, so the performance differences, I don't think it's fair for me to demonstrate that with the camera that I have. However, what I will say is with the Sony a7R III, the hit rate was virtually identical, and when it came to like autofocus performance for video, again, the results were virtually identical, but that could be because I've got an older camera, so any differences that may be present are just not being highlighted as effectively with the system that I have. So on a more modern camera, maybe the Sigma will outperform the Sony, but in my testing, I couldn't find any real differences in the actual hit rate. It felt snappier, but when I looked at the hit rate and the actual performance, there wasn't much in it, so I'm not gonna, I didn't want to put that part into this video. But other than that, huge win for Sigma. Really pleased with the lenses that they're producing right now, and yeah, that's the comparison. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe, share this video, and hope to see you all in the next one. Thank you.